He was the slave boy who became patron saint and savior of the pagan Irish. The holy wanderer who banished Ireland's snakes and lit a fire in the hearts of her people that would never go out. He was Patrick, perhaps the world's most legendary saint. The legend of St. Patrick, Ireland's patron saint, has been woven through the ages into a rich and colourful tapestry that has come to symbolize that land the world over. As the story has been passed down, it was he who walked the hills and the valleys of Ireland, preaching his gospel of love and redemption. He who banished all the snakes from its shores. He who, with a bishop's crozier in one hand and a sprig of shamrock in the other, converted the pagan Irish to Christianity over 15 centuries ago. And yet, beneath this glorious mantle of legend and superstition was a real person. And in his confession, the oldest surviving writings in the annals of Irish history, he tells us himself who he was and where he came from.
I am Patricius, a sinner, the most unlearned of men. My father was Calpurnius, a deacon. He ministered in Benavent Taberniae, where he had a country residence nearby. It was here that I was taken captive.
At the age of 16, Patricius, a young Welsh nobleman, fell victim to a raiding party from across the sea and was sold into slavery in Ireland. He got his first sight of the land that would one day take him to its heart through the planks of a pirate ship's hold. He was sold to a chieftain in the north who set him tending sheep. The young captive found himself in a very different country to the one he had left behind. Here, the High King ruled with his druids, the ancient and mysterious priests of the Celtic people. The people Patrick met were pagans, with strange customs and superstitions. But Patrick grew to love the ordinary Irish people for their good humor, their love of life, and their great appetite for music and storytelling. Patrick also grew to love God. And one night, on the lonely hillside that was his home, he had a vision. In a dream, a messenger told him that a ship awaited, ready to carry him out of captivity to do God's work. At first light the next morning, Patrick stole away from his captors and embarked on a perilous journey that would take him the length of Ireland and across the sea. There he would learn to become a shepherd of men. But the land of his captivity was never far from his mind.
I saw a vision in the night, and I heard the familiar accents of the people. They called out as if they had one voice. "We beseech you, holy youth, come and walk once more among us."
And so the shepherd boy returned a bishop, sent to make God's children out of the pagan Irish. And in the manner of his arrival, he demonstrated to all his bravery and the power of his faith. The The day that Patrick arrived back in Ireland, whether by luck or design, was the Feast of Light. Across the land, all fires had been extinguished, for the king was giver of light, and the people lit their fires only after the great beacon on the royal hill of Tara had been lit by the king himself. But as the king prepared to set the sacred beacon ablaze, a cry of dismay went up from his warriors and druids. Across the dusky plain, another beacon was already burning brightly on the Hill of Slain. The king's druids had foretold that one day a light would be lit that would never go out. And so it was to be. In time, Patrick's beacon would shed its light on every part of Ireland. And as the love of God grew in the hearts of its people, so the legend of Patrick began to take hold in their imagination. But what became of the shepherd boy? Who is the man who wrote the first words ever written in Irish history? And why does his feast day bring some of the world's largest cities to a standstill, some 15 centuries later? The Confession of St. Patrick, penned towards the end of the 5th century, is the first written document in Irish history. It begins with an account of Patrick's early life, where we discover that the great patron saint of Ireland was not himself Irish. He grew up in a town somewhere along the west coast of Britain. The islands of Ireland and Britain, lying at Europe's western edge, were very different places during the 5th century.
At that time, slavery was a normal practice, and Patrick was taken as a slave by Irish people who were raiding Roman Britain. Because when the Romans came to Britain in the 1st century AD, Roman Britain became wealthy, and so it was a source of wealth for the Irish, and they raided along the coast of Britain, particularly in the 4th century and early 5th centuries. We have many examples of that through the archaeological record, the objects that they brought back with them and so on, and indeed references in the sources, the Roman sources, to the Irish raiding Britain. And on such raids, they brought back slaves.
5th century Ireland was home to the last Celtic civilization in Europe. After they had been subdued by the Romans elsewhere, this proud pagan race of warriors, poets, craftsmen and druids survived unchallenged in Ireland. Patrick, the young nobleman turned shepherd, spent his first years in this strange land on Slemish, a wind-swept mountain in the north. It was there he learned the ways of his captors, and there his love for the Irish people took root in his heart. It was this love that would call him back to Ireland many years later as a shepherd of men.
He had an absolute dedication to the Irish, to his converts, and felt it an absolute mission to bring the word of God to the pagan Irish, the people that had actually held him captive in Ireland. And his mission, therefore, was a mission to pagans quite distinct. And for that reason, his life was in constant danger. He was often held in chains, in captivity, while he was actually preaching in Ireland and teaching in Ireland, and relied on his converts and friends to ransom him and rescue him.
The story of Patrick's beacon on the Hill of Slain and his legendary defiance of the king and his druids is not recorded by him in his confession. Yet, it is one of the oldest and most persistent legends. It represents the first confrontation in Ireland between the old pagan religion and the new Christian faith. Patrick could not have chosen a better stage for this first encounter. To the south lay the royal hill of Tara, seat of the Irish High Kings, and nearby in the east were the great megalithic tombs of the Boyne Valley, the oldest and most sacred precinct of pagan Ireland. In Celtic society, the Druids were wise and holy men, and held positions of great power and influence. To defy them, or to blaspheme against their laws was to risk almost certain death. By making his courageous stand during the Feast of Light, Patrick was laying down a challenge to the laws of the Celtic Druids. And in the name of God, he was laying claim to the souls of the Irish people. So the legend of Patrick's Beacon is often regarded as a symbol of his coming rather than an actual event in his life. One tantalizing piece of evidence, however, suggests that the real Patrick was just as courageous as this legend would have us believe. A letter written by Patrick to Coroticus, a British prince, has survived intact to the present day. In it, Patrick condemns Coroticus for the slaughter of Irish converts by raiders from Britain.
Newly baptized in their white clothing, the oil still shining in their heads, they were cruelly butchered and slaughtered by the sword. I cannot say how many. So may the wrong done not please you, and even into hell may it give you no pleasure.
The saint's own words reveal a most extraordinary man, bold and determined, not afraid to confront a powerful warrior. Perhaps he deserves some of the later legends which have been attributed to him.
He was a man of the earth, a man of the people. And so that means that we can say everything we read about him, everything we read that he wrote and said and taught, has got that lovely common touch. It's earthed in the Ireland of his day, but he was a very spiritually minded person of the people. And I think that gives the clue to his importance. I believe there's sufficient evidence to say there was the boy Patrick, the Brit Patrick, the person who came to Ireland with a particular tradition, a particular background, but who became more Irish than the Irish. I believe that man existed. And I think it's very wrong for him to be given just a political or religious or single cultural identity. He was a man, if you'll forgive the phrase, for all seasons and all time.
Legend has it that Patrick's influence spread quickly to all parts of Ireland. As he travelled throughout the land, people flocked to hear the words of the former slave and shepherd boy. And inspired by his simple message of love, king and commoner alike set aside their pagan ways and were baptized into the Christian church by Patrick's own hand. Yet glorious as this vision may seem, Ireland's conversion from paganism to Christianity was a more difficult task, and one which required a subtle and inventive mind. As Patrick and the missionaries who came after him would discover, compromise, not conversion, was the key to success. And the genius of Ireland's early bishops was their ability to integrate pagan practices to the new religion. Indeed, it was the fusion of Christian symbolism with Ireland's more ancient pagan beliefs that in the end would assure the success of Patrick's mission. No portrait of Patrick is complete without the serpents he banished cowering beneath his feet. While there are several saints who are credited with similar deeds around Europe, St. Patrick has one distinct advantage over other claimants. There are indeed no snakes in Ireland.
Patrick, of course, traditionally is associated with getting rid of the snakes out of Ireland. That is one of the lovely stories growing up around him. In fact, he had nothing at all to do with the snakes. The snakes were banished from Ireland with the Ice Age.
In Christian tradition, the snake represents the devil, the power of evil, and the dangers of temptation. Yet even today, many of the most celebrated aspects of Patrick's legend are heavily imbued with beliefs and superstitions older than Christianity itself. Perhaps the most famous is the link between Patrick and the simple shamrock, a plant which has become a symbol of all that is Irish around the world. According to legend, Patrick found himself in difficulty one day, as he attempted to explain the mystery of the Holy Trinity to a pagan chieftain. Then, at his feet, he noticed a clump of shamrock. Taking a single stem, Patrick told him the 3 leaves of the shamrock, united on one stem, were like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. 3 persons in one God. On the surface, this little tale seems to be nothing more than an innocent Christian parable. Until, that is, we look a little deeper. During the 5th century, shamrocks were rare, and it is more likely that the plant which Patrick plucked was a piece of 3-leaved cress, which grew in abundance. Cress was known to the Druids as a plant of magical properties, and it is said that they brewed from its leaves an aphrodisiac. As a fellow Celt, Patrick would have been sympathetic to the ancient superstitions. But instead of condemning these pagan traditions, his genius lay in reclaiming them, even using the ingredients of a pagan love potion to explain the most sacred mystery of the Christian faith. But just as Patrick appropriated pagan traditions to spread his message, so would his own reputation be usurped by others with less noble aspirations. According to one legend, while Patrick was baptizing King Angus of Munster, he inadvertently put the spike of his crosier through the royal convert's foot. The king said nothing, thinking it was part of the ceremony. And Patrick was said to be so pleased with the king's devotion that he promised none of his descendants would ever die of a wound. Like many other tales of Patrick, the legend of the king's conversion probably has little basis in truth. And it is far from the only legend associated with the saint to have been invented. In the case of King Angus, the men of the Munster region no doubt used the story to taunt their enemies. Such a blessing would have made them formidable soldiers. Alas for them, we can be fairly sure that Patrick never came to Munster.
Ireland in the 5th century was a very heavy forested island with many inland lakes and bogs, making it a totally impossible place to travel very, very quickly. And therefore, the number of places associated with St. Patrick could never have been covered by one individual in a normal lifetime.
But for millions, the life of St. Patrick is more important than any of the colourful legends which surround it. And so, even today, the greatest of Patrick's legacies lives on. The devotion which, for over 15 centuries, has kept his spirit alive. This is where the legendary Patrick steps out of the realms of myth into living history. In many ways, the journey of Patrick's life has become an icon of the Christian faith. Even today, there are many places in Ireland, like towering Croagh Patrick on Ireland's Atlantic shore, associated with the saint, that are sacred to pilgrims around the world. But what is it that can still draw huge crowds to follow in the footsteps of a 5th century missionary, to seek out the bleakness and hardship of the wilderness where Patrick once walked? It is said that Patrick would often travel far into the wilds to pray in solitude, as he had done as a young shepherd boy. One stormy night, according to legend, he took refuge in a cave on an island in the middle of a great lake. During the night, he awoke to a terrible vision. The back of the cave had split open, and as Patrick gazed on in horror, he saw the grisly torments of hell. The island on Loch Derg, where the vision is supposed to have taken place, has been a shrine to Patrick since medieval times. It is known as St. Patrick's Purgatory, and each year thousands of pilgrims from all over the world still visit this great basilica. For 3 days they come here to deprive themselves of sleep, walk barefoot on jagged stones and pray constantly. In doing so, they honor the memory of Patrick. The hardship, it is said, reminds the pilgrim of the vision which Patrick himself witnessed, the horror which awaits the unrepentant sinner.
We're here at Saul, traditionally the first site of the first Christian church in Ireland. Patrick, when he arrived back as a missioner, after his escape from being a prisoner, he was offered an outhouse in the Irish sabble, meaning a pig house. That was his first church, traditionally on this site. And from the 5th century right down to the present day has been a place where Christians of all denominations have worshipped.
It was here at Saul that Patrick died. The legends say that for 12 days afterwards the sun blazed in the sky and night refused to fall. At his burial, the men of Ulster placed his body on a cart drawn by untamed oxen and carried it to a place now called Down Patrick, where they buried him. But the Ulstermen were not the only ones to claim that Patrick lay beneath their soil. Indeed, many towns claim the honor. Because of the many different conflicting accounts of his death, the final resting place of Ireland's patron saint remains controversial to this day. The great slab at Downpatrick is favoured by many, but no one is sure. But if Patrick's actual body cannot be located, that doesn't mean there aren't many different centres for his cult. In addition to Saul, perhaps his first church, there is Armagh, where Patrick is said to have founded a great cathedral. However, today in Armagh there are 2 cathedrals, one Catholic, the other Protestant, both dedicated to Patrick. Both regard Patrick as their founder. Relics of St. Patrick were also plentiful in the centuries that followed his death. There was money to be made in having a piece of the great man, a strong incentive for churches and monasteries all over Ireland to discover a relic of their own. One of the most macabre is this jawbone, cherished for centuries as the very jaw that once pronounced the great saint's teachings. Today, archaeologists consider most of these so-called relics to be medieval fakes, except for one. A simple bronze handbell, which dates from the correct period, now encased in this domed and jeweled bell shrine, is now thought to have been one of Patrick's personal possessions. Patrick is remembered in folk tradition as the nation's spiritual champion, who still looks down from heaven on his flock. Even today, the annual parades in his honor continue to bring some of the world's largest cities to a standstill. Yet here there is another surprise. The parade that has become an expression of all that is Irish actually originated in America, where the English and American armies would conduct military parades on that day to encourage reluctant Irishmen to enlist. But there is one final unwritten chapter in the legend of Ireland's patron saint. One day, it is said, Patrick will return. In the last years of his life, though the venerable saint was an old man, he set out to climb a great mountain, known today as Croagh Patrick, to find peace and solitude. The legends say he met an angel there, who granted him whatever he wanted because of the great good he had done. Patrick asked that the Irish people should be spared the Armageddon, and that on the last day of creation, he himself would be their judge. Down the generations, Patrick has become the embodiment of Irish identity and national integrity. Even today, Irishmen everywhere are known, not always affectionately, as Paddies, But what of Patrick the man? What of the shepherd boy turned bishop? The pirate's slave turned patron saint? Unlike many characters of the Dark Ages, with Patrick, we may peer back through centuries of myth, legend, and folklore, and read his own words as he wrote them. That he may one day return, no one can know. That he came and left in his wake a very different Ireland, there can be no doubt.